Yeah, I think I took it in as a whole.
Mm.
By the end, I was kind of like, oh, okay, I kind of get the gist of this rather than...
Should we start?
Yeah. Hi, guys.
Hello.
We are in the cabin because, as everybody knows, the wind is the enemy. And it is 30, what do you reckon, 35? Maybe
I
more?
reckon, no, a bit less. Gusts of 32, 33, something like that. But we did have some, we ran the session.
We've done a session. We did pizzas in the wood oven.
It was nice.
And we're sat and we're doing 2 podcasts in a row. So we've got biscuits and hot drinks. But we are talking this time about the book that we said at the end of last week. So if you've read it, great. If you haven't, we're going to kind of summarise and badly summarise and synthesise.
I'm trying to remember what it's about.
An entire book. Yeah. So when
the book is Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication, a language for life.
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a kind of little mini impression of Marshall Rosenberg. We both listened to it.
Yes.
On Audible, and he narrates it. He's got a very lovely voice. But you actually introduced me to the idea of playing something at 1 1/4 speed. With this, you could probably go up to 1 1/2, maybe 2. Slow.
He's very intentional about his.
Yeah.
And I think that it's that thing, isn't it, of like what he's saying has a lot of gravitas to it, and so sometimes the speed, it does need to be slower to say, oh, okay, I'm going to actually pay attention to that.
Yeah.
I quite. So I finished it. It must have been maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month ago now, and you've only recently finished it this week. But I think the first thing that I remembered was that I quite liked that lots of the books that are like this will always have like examples in them, example stories. Yeah. But all of his are just kind of like, oh, this is a thing I did. They're all him.
Yeah.
And some of them he's very honest about, like, oh, I walked away and I realised that like I could have completely solved this. I'll tell you what. So from the outset, there's only one example in it where in my head it flipped to like crazy person believes that their theory can change the world, which I think is we're going to say the same one, which is
of all the examples, you think, did that really happen, Marshall? Did it actually? And it doesn't really matter whether it did happen or not, because he's just going like, this is what could happen. But this one, I'm like,
so there's a woman who talks about it.
She talks herself
out of being like raped by someone, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Allegedly.
She's a teacher in a school and she's working late, and then this guy, like, he grew up in Detroit in a really rough neighbourhood, didn't he? And so a lot of the people, like, he's well respected across the world and has been to some incredibly violent, hostile places and mediated with sides that have just been killing each other for years and years. So I do believe that he's done that. But he talks about this woman who has gone on one of his courses, and she comes back and tells him the story that she manages to empathise and sort of demonstrate to this guy that comes in and
she still gets mugged. That's the thing, which I think makes it a little bit more credible, is that if he'd been like, oh, this woman told me that a guy came in with a knife and was going to rape her and steal all her money, and she completely took him out of it, and he does still take her wallet and go, which I was then like, oh, okay, have you put that in? But that's one.
There's another one with somebody who works in a homeless shelter and gets a knife put to her throat with a guy on top of her, and she apparently talks her way out of that until he is like, kind of, his rage turns to tears and he talks about his feelings, and then.
So that I think is one of the things that I took away from that book, is that I really liked it as a communication style and as a possibly as a like target to be going for. Like, this is that's the epitome. His stories are perhaps the epitome of talking with empathy and just reflecting back to people like, oh, it sounds like that's his whole thing, isn't it? Sounds like you're angry, and trying to really get to people. But a lot of what I think he talks about, and a lot of the benefit from it, I don't think it's quite factored in. I would have liked something, I think, that was like for situations when when you haven't got time. So I'm thinking of, there are lots of children that if you like could in some way pin them into a conversation with you long term, you know, he's talking about one group of school kids and he empathised with them for like a whole hour and a half, and he's like, and by the end we were really bonding, and you go, that sounds incredible, but you don't have that luxury, and it is a luxury with everyone, and particularly people that are having difficult conversations with you. You haven't got the time to go, oh, okay, there's some time before, like, where I can talk to you before, you know, you see a kid who's starting to go off the handle, you might have under a minute to talk and say, oh, it looks like you're getting angry, but...
I guess the point is that with Forest School, you're working with children and groups long term, and if you can begin to bring in some of this way of communicating all the time, you are modelling that way of communicating, and hopefully there'll be kind of a drip effect of that filtering through to not only you speaking to the groups and your relationship with each child, but the children's relationships with one another, because they will pick up on your phraseology in the way that you approach big emotions, and they might start to use some of it. So I think the examples that we've talked about are kind of massive crisis moments, aren't they? But if you kind of look at it in terms of even just smaller ways, and even ways of, you know, it kind of links a bit in the way into the podcast we did the other day on burnout, and how sometimes you get into a bit of a negative spiral when you feel like, you know, especially in winter and you've been like giving everything, and then often in bad weather, that's when groups might get a bit like tetchy and everything just seems like it's really difficult. It's a way of kind of reframing the way that you look at the world as well. That's what I really liked about it. So I liked the beginning of it, talking about how we're kind of raised in this world where we are taught to judge everybody and everything, and including ourselves. So they're a good person, they're a bad person, they're kind, they're unkind, they're snobby, that, you know, just all those kind of judgmental goodies and baddies. That is the way that you're brought up, and that's the way you see the world.
And it's a simplified way, isn't it? Rather than having to say what he advocates for, isn't it? Is a much more kind of abstract, like, he puts his car in front of my driveway.
Yeah.
Which in turn doesn't have any moral pros, cons.
Yeah. So what is that person doing which is not fulfilling your needs, or is preventing your needs from being met, is the way that he tries to reframe it for you. And so if you find somebody very annoying or aggravating or upsetting, then you try and go, okay, well, actually, they are not the problem. There is a thing in me that is not being met or is becoming frustrated. And he talks you through a way of addressing what are real emotions and what aren't really, and a way of so, you know, if you're encouraged to communicate with other people, be it a partner or someone that you see regularly, and you're encouraged to kind of don't let that sit on your chest, get your emotions out, which is all very well and good, but then if you do that in a way, it's like, I don't like it when you blah because I feel blah, which is the way that we might be encouraged to communicate with other people. Actually, that's perceived by that other person as an attack. And so he demonstrates to kind of talk about, so to practice, you have to practice these kind of sentences, and I really like that, and I found that quite mind-blowing. I was like, oh my gosh, you know. So especially, and he gives lots of very domestic examples of partners who are like, you know, one's working more than the other, and how to phrase
money problems, isn't it? One of them's about money, and the one of them's not secure in how much money the other's spending, and that's quite a nice one.
Yeah, and I thought there was a lot of value in there, and I think that would take such a long time. As he says, you know, we're programmed, we're brought up to view this kind of very moralistic judgment, and to go back and listen to it again or read it again and kind of practice those statements. I think,
and it really separates from the person listening to what you're saying. It separates any sort of like, or maybe not separates, but it's less like responsibility, because if you say like you're really untidy, that's unfixable, because there's not a it's almost like smart targets, isn't it? And saying you're untidy, there's no, I can't, you can't fix untidy, but if you go, you leave the pan on the side, or you've left the pan on the side, or even
it's
like that thing of like,
when
I
you
can
leave
fix
the
that.
pan on the side, but would he say that? I don't know. That's still quite accusatory, isn't it? When the pans are on the side, my need for order is being threatened, and then he advocates that humans, which I really like this idea that humans get joy from enriching lives for themselves and for others, and that is the root of happiness, basically. And I really love that, and that kind of ties into some of the stuff that we try and do in sessions with kind of gratefulness and reflection at the end and things like that. And I just really like that way of approaching the world, you know. So if you can say to somebody, his argument is that if you can say to somebody, if you explain what's alive in you and therefore what you need, then most people will be happy to respond to that need and enrich your life for you. My issue was what happens when they're not. You just live with that, I guess. And also, he gives an example of children. He gives an example of like telling your kid to getting your kid to brush their teeth.
Yeah.
But then he doesn't say how he actually does it, and so that's alive in me right now. Like my 4-year-old has decided that brushing teeth is the worst thing. It is just the worst thing, and so he would say, rather than using shame, guilt, threats, all the rest of it, you want that action to come from a place without all that stuff.
Yeah. My need to keep you safe isn't being met.
Exactly. And you say that and they go, don't care. Don't want to do it.
But he does mention because I think he can foresee that, and he does have a bit where he's saying that you have to be saying your needs and what's alive in you without any onus that it's anyone else's job to fix it. All you are doing is putting it out into the world, because he said otherwise all you're just reframing it.
Yeah.
You're just saying the same thing of like, I need you to put the pan away, but you've now gone around the houses to say it rather than doing whatever else.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite an important thing. You know, he's got a big bit on you are the only person that is responsible for your emotions, and it's not on anybody else.
Yeah.
And so you can say like, this isn't meeting my need for, you know, to feel like I'm looking after you or whatever else, but you can't expect that sentence
will have an effect.
Will have it. Yeah,
completely. And I guess if you are, again, like, you know, the whole drip feed effect, so okay, the teeth thing is going to be a battle for a long time, but if you are noticing and commenting on loads of stuff that happens in a relationship that does meet your needs, if you're like, oh, you know, thank you for setting the table, that really helped me when I was needing to get the food ready on time, and I really appreciate it, thank you. So if you're making an effort to comment on those things that are great about a relationship with a certain person at the moment and are reciprocal to each other's needs, then that feeling of warmth and like, oh, I've enriched that person's life is encouraged, and so hopefully it spreads, I guess, which is really nice.
It's an interesting thing. So you have said, not on the podcast, but you've said before about some other not parenting techniques, but some other sort of theories and styles of communication. You've said, oh, I feel like if you have to work that hard to do it, then it's almost like it's not natural, or that you've said that you don't think that then that's honest, or but then you seem to have done the opposite with this. Marshall, that you've kind of gone, oh, it is really difficult, but I can see how long term that becomes the norm, and I wonder whether you...
Yeah, I think that's... so I think you're talking about Alfie Kohn and some of his... about praise specifically. So, I would say probably that's because I have a bit of an issue with some of his ideas with some children, so I think probably I'm willing to change my communication style significantly if it's something that I think is definitely positive. I'm not 100% sure about some...
You haven't drunk the Kool-Aid? You haven't drunk the Alfie Kool-Aid?
No. Not entirely. I've drunk a bit of it. Some of it I definitely, and I have embraced and taken on. But it is, it's a communication style, isn't it? And that is such a... You know, the way you talk to children is the relationship, and so it's very, you know, if you're kind of reading an idea about like, oh, never say this or say it in this way, some of it I think some of it I think I don't know.
And I do think there's something about sort of teaching as a role, and even parenting to an extent, where I do get the thing of you need to be honest and you need to show children that you are a three-dimensional person and that you're not always perfect and you're doing whatever. But I also think there's another thing that can be like, well, if you can make this communication artificial and you can, like you're saying, it's hard work for us because we've been raised in this other way. But if we can push through that and that becomes the normal communication here, you then have potentially a generation of children that come through where that is then the norm.
Oh yeah.
And then and it's like, is that worth sacrificing your? Okay, I'm not going to talk to you how I I'm abstractly.
Do you know what I think it is? I think the thing about the non-violent communication is that it is more honest. That's why I like it.
Okay.
Because some of the Afro stuff, and only some of it, like I agree with the majority of it. It's just some of it which is. And as I said, I think maybe I need to go back and read it again because some of it might have kind of got a bit, mushed up in my head. It gets moved,
doesn't it, in your head?
Especially the more you read and the more you take on. But I think you end up communicating more with non-violent communication. You are releasing verbally more of the stuff that's going on inside you, and it feels very relaxing to do it because you, instead of just going, do this, for example, brush your teeth, you're explaining why, you're saying, I have this need right now, and then, so that is also helping children's cognition and recognition of emotions, isn't it? So if that thing about naming, you're naming feelings, you're naming your thought process, you're explaining how you've come to a conclusion that an action needs to happen, and so that is, how beneficial is that for learning, even beyond the whole relationship building? That is a child going, oh, okay, the adult has gone through from A, B, C to here, and this is the action that's happening because of that. So it's almost like explaining your thought process.
I think it's almost as well a little bit of so there's two parts to it, isn't it? There's the I think you could say there's two parts. There's the speaking your truth and saying what's alive in you, and these are the needs I have, and then the other bit of it is the reflecting back and it looks like you're angry, and just I think it feels like it would work particularly well with children because. With I don't want to say limited, I'm going to say different communication skills, you can perhaps put into words things that children might be feeling but that they don't have the ability to say, which is a positive for them, but also I think it's a positive for you in that you are not reacting with such a primal part of your brain to be like, you're annoying, or like this is making me angry, because if you engage with it, you're using, I would say, I'd imagine, I'm not a neuroscientist, like a much further forward part of your brain in that you are forcing yourself to empathise and to think, what are you feeling?
Yeah, it's much more rational, isn't it? It's much more logical to go, okay, you're doing this, which is irritating that more primal part of my brain, but if I actually go to the front of my brain and go, but why?
Yeah. It gets you out of the flight or fight thing and into a like, oh, okay, I'm going to really you can't be angry whilst you're trying to understand someone. It takes you out of that moment, makes you step outside of yourself, which is what I think is beneficial to, like, going back to what I was saying, where it might not be the most natural thing in the world to not react, but
it's so much more healthy, and you can stay in control a lot better. The issue, and I've tried it with my own kids, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it definitely works. There's been times where one of them has become dysregulated, and I've been able to go, it looks like you're feeling that, and he gives some examples of like trying to guess. I'm guessing it might be because you're frustrated because of XYZ, and then the person will go, no, okay, what could it be? I'm wondering if it's this, and they go, no, and then they find the words to tell you what the matter is. But sometimes for some children, they don't know why. That's also an issue, that you get some children who will demonstrate some behaviour that is dangerous or apparently to us out of control, and it isn't through an emotional place, it's just because, and that is still an issue that this kind of communication is not going to address. So you could stand there all you like and go, you're smacking that you're trying to smack that other person, I'm guessing it's because you're angry. And honestly, there are some children that no, they are not they're not
it's not frontal cortex. It's complete
it's just
reptilian.
What happens when I do this?
Yeah.
What happens?
Yeah.
What happens if I smack this other person? What happens if I?
But I do think there's a benefit to even if you can't get it, even if you can't pin down a like, haha, I found the answer, the key thing. There's a benefit to a child who is dysregulated having an adult verbally sort of demonstrate how hard they are trying to understand them, because the message there is like is not a like you are angry and I don't know because you won't tell me. It's a like, look how hard that adult is trying to understand me. Look how and again, might not be a
solution
waterfall. No, I was going to say it might not be a waterfall moment where suddenly that child then is never dysregulated. That's ridiculous to say. But if you, over the space of a long-term relationship, have lots of times where you try really hard, that you're going to have such a different relationship because it's
and you're modelling that so that they might then also see the value of trying to understand somebody. So they will see that when they are dysregulated, it has this effect on other humans, and and it's worth stopping and trying to find out what's going on in them, what's alive in them. So
it's an interesting thing. I think we're coming roughly towards where I would end, but it's one of those areas where I would say it's interesting that something like this can be so in my head so Forest School, but not be part of Forest School. Like I can't think of any practitioners I personally know that I think if they read the book would go, nah, disagree with that. Who of like Forest School practitioners. But you could run a Forest School and not have this. I think it would be beneficial for everyone, and I think it's interesting that we talked before about training and things, but that there isn't some sort of like reading list or I guess because Forest School is so personalised that there aren't people going, well, I guess this is what we're doing, isn't it? We're just saying, look, we think this is incredibly valuable. If you work in a Forest School or you work with children or you are a parent, or actually it's not just to do with kids, is it? It's to do with communicating with other human beings. You will find this book beneficial. I in the same way that I was saying at the start that it would be nice if you could pin everybody into having these in-depth conversations. It would be nice if you could make people read this book, but you can't.
No.
And you just have to kind of go around the world and just keep saying, oh, it's valuable. It is valuable. This was really good.
I think it's just it's just another tool, isn't it? It's another tool in your toolkit of.
And it might be a nice thing as we're getting to the end of the year, if you were looking for something to think about your 2019, I would say grab a copy, get it on Audible, because then if you do it on Audible, you wouldn't have to worry about postage over Christmas. You could just download it straight away.
That's true.
And you could pretend you've got work to do when all the family are in your house, and you can just I've just got to go and
Christmas, do you know what, I think it might actually come in handy quite a lot.
It looks like you're really disappointed with the socks I've got you. to speak my truth, these oven gloves are crap.
Now wait a minute, you're telling me that you're disgusted with the way I've prepared these vegetables because you think they're chopped to the wrong size.
Yeah,
if I'm reading this right,
what I'm hearing is that you think broccoli tastes like poo-poo.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying? I understand.
Yeah.
Right. Derailed.
Yeah.
Cool. Bye.
Bye.